Penguin Random House Canada presents Galore by Michael Crummey. Read for you by Mary Lewis. The invincible power that has moved the world is unrequited, not happy love. Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I will bring my people again from the depth of the sea. Psalms. Part 1. Chapter 1. He ended his time on the shore in a makeshift asylum cell, shut away with the profligate stink of fish that clung to him all his days. The Great White. St. Jude of the Lost Cause. Sea Orphan. He seemed more or less content there, gnawing at the walls with a nail. Mary Trefina Devine brought him bread and dried capelin that he left to gather bluebottles and mold on the floor. "If you aren't going to eat," she said, "at least have the decency to die." Mary Trefina was a child when she first laid eyes on the man, a lifetime past. End of April, and the ice just gone from the bay. Most of the shore's meager population, the Irish and West Country English and the bushborns of uncertain provenance, were camped on the grey sand, waiting to butcher a whale that had beached itself in the shallows on the feast day of St. Mark. This during a time of scarcity when the ocean was barren and gardens went to rot in the relentless rain, and each winter threatened to bury them all. They weren't whalers, and no one knew how to go about killing the Leviathan, but there was something in the humpback's unexpected offering that prevented the starving men from hacking away while the fish still breathed, as if that would be a desecration of the gift. They'd scaled the whale's back to drive a stake with a maul, hoping to strike some vital organ, and managed to set it bleeding steadily. They saw nothing for it then but to wait for God to do his work, and they sat with their splitting knives and fish prongs, with their dip nets and axes and saws and barrels. The wind was razor sharp, and Mary Trefina lost all feeling in her hands and feet, and her little arse went dunch on the sand while the whale expired in imperceptible increments. Jabez Trim waded out at intervals to prod at the fat saucer of an eye and report back on God's progress. Halfway along the beach, King Sellers was carrying on a tournament of draughts with his grandson. He'd hobbled down from his store to make a claim to the animal, as it had gone aground below Spurrier's premises. The fishermen argued that the beach in question wasn't built over and, according to tradition, was public property, which meant the whale was salvage, the same as if a wreck had washed ashore. King Me swore he'd have the whale's liver and 8 puncheons of oil, or the lot of them would stand before the court he ruled as magistrate. Once terms were agreed upon, Sellers had his grandson bring down his scarred wooden checkerboard, and they set out flat stones for the pieces gone missing through the years. His grandson was the only person willing to sit through a game with Sellers, who was known to change the rules to suit himself and was not above cheating outright to win. He owned the board, he told the complainers, and in his mind that meant he owned the rules that governed it as well. His periodic cries of "King Me" were the only human sound on the landwash as they waited. Mary Trefina was asleep when the men finally rushed the shallows, her father shouting for her to fetch Devine's widow. She left the beach as she was told, walking the waterside pathway through Paradise Deep and up the incline of the Tolt Road. She crossed the headland that rose between the two coves, and carried on into the gut where her grandmother had delivered Mary Trefina's brother that morning. The landwash was red with blood by the time she and the old woman made their way back, a scum of grease on the harbor's surface. The heart and liver already carted up to Kingme's rooms on fish barrows. 2 men harvesting chunks of baleen from the creature's jaw with axes, the mouth so massive they could almost stand upright inside it. Women and children floated barrels in the shallows to catch the ragged squares of blubber thrown down to them. Mary Tryphina's grandmother knotted her skirts above the knee before wading grimly into the water. The ugly work went on through the day. Black fires were burning on the beach to render the blubber to oil, and the stench stoppered the harbor, as if they were laboring in a low-ceilinged warehouse. The white underbelly was exposed where the carcass keeled to one side, the stomach's membrane floating free in the shallows. The Tusher triplets were poking idly at the massive gut with splitting knives and prongs, dirty seawater pouring from the gash they opened, a crest of blood, a school of undigested capelin and herring, and then the head appeared, the boys screaming and falling away at the sight. It was a human head, the hair bleached white. One pale arm flopped through the ragged incision and dangled into the water. For a time, no one moved or spoke, watching as if they expected the man to stand and walk ashore of his own accord. Devine's widow waded over finally to finish the job, the body slipping into the water as she cut it free. The Catholics crossed themselves in concert, and Jabez Trim said, "Naked came I from my mother's womb." The body was dragged out of the water by Devine's widow and Mary Tryphina's father. No one else would touch it, though every soul on the beach crowded around to look. A young man's face, but the strangeness of the details made it impossible to guess his age. White eyebrows and lashes, a patch of salt-white hair at the crotch. Even the lips were colorless, nipples so pale they were nearly invisible on the chest. Mary Tryphina hugged her father's thigh and stared, Callum holding her shoulder to stop her moving any closer. Kingme Sellers prodded at the corpse with the tip of his walking stick. He looked at Devine's widow, and then turned to take in each person standing about him. "This is her doing," he said. "She got the very devil in her. Called this creature into our harbour for God knows what end." "Conjured it, you mean?" James Woundy said. It was so long since Kingme accused Devine's widow of such things that some in the crowd were inclined to take him seriously. He might have convinced others if he'd managed to leave off mentioning his livestock. "You know what she done to my cow," he said, "and to every cow birthed of her since." It was an old joke on the shore, and there was already a dismissive tremor in the gathering when Devine's widow leaned over the body, flicking at the shrunken penis with the tip of her knife. "If this was my doing," she said, "I'd have given the poor soul more to work with than that." Kingme pushed his way past the laughter of the bystanders, saying he'd have nothing more to do with the devilment, but no one followed after him. They stood a while discussing the strange event, a fisherman washed overboard in a storm, or a suicide made strange by too many months at sea. Idle speculation that didn't begin to address the man's appearance or his grave in the whale's belly. They came, finally, to the consensus that life was a mystery and a wonder beyond human understanding, a conclusion they were comfortable with, though there was little comfort in the thought. The unfortunate soul was owed a Christian burial, and there was the rest of the day's work to get on with. There was no church on the shore. An itinerant Dominican friar named Phelan said Mass when he passed through on his endless ecclesiastical rounds, and Jabez Trim held a weekly Protestant service at one of Sellers' stores that was attended by both sides of the house when Father Phelan was away on his wanders. Trim had no credentials other than the ability to read and an incomplete copy of the Bible, but every soul on the shore crowded the storeroom to soak a while in the Scripture's balm.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?